feel like we have been planted a lot of star seeds, right? In these generations, in these families that maybe you might be the first generation in your family that is talking about this, getting therapy about this, not
Mhm.
sweeping it under the rug,
Completely.
stopping the generational trauma, sexual trauma, incest, stopping it in the family. Like
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
my family. That's been the story. It's been going on in my family a really long time, and
Yeah.
it was like, "No, this is done, like, we're gonna start talking about this," and all of a sudden, like, holidays became, like, group therapy. It's like,
Mhm.
"This is it. No more. This is why have we not started talking about this? Why do we just ignore that
Yeah.
these people did this, and why are we just now finding this out, or why are we pretending like this didn't happen? No, we're going to start talking about this so it continues to keep the other generations safe. So we are healing so much is coming to the surface. I just
Mhm.
have to put that out there. And this may be a really sensitive subject to our listeners. I also want to have a lot of compassion right now to anyone who's listening, to just know that if this is fresh wounds, that it's important that you find someone that you feel safe to talk to. There are people, therapists, to
Mhm.
help in counseling, to support all kinds of healing, holistic healers, individual people to talk to. It's really good to get support, but that these wounds are coming up to the surface in order to heal, to be seen, to be heard, to be felt. Hello, and welcome back to Spiritually Naked with Soul. My name is Molly, and I am here with Arla Markel, and we are returning, coming back into the separation wound and return to a higher level love. So, thank you
Mhm.
for being here, Arla, with me. Thank you for tuning in with us.
I feel like every time we do one of these, it's like we're bringing the things that we're experiencing to it's so fresh. It's like all this, and it's what people are going through. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with where we have been and what we have been talking about, what has really been coming up to the surface is really important to talk about, and really important to bring up, is really this core separation wound, between the masculine and the feminine. We've been talking about the divine union and the union journey and all these activations that happen, along the priestess path and this return to inner union. But really, where did it come from? Why are we returning? Where did the separation begin in the first place? And, all this pain and trauma and everything that's coming up to the surface that humanity has been moving through, and this fragmentation
Mhm.
that is bringing them to the return to union, and why it's so important right now on the planet of this inner masculine and feminine union for the collective healing. And really, like, why the world feels like it's on fire because of this dark night of the soul that the
Mhm.
masculine is going through, because
Mhm.
the feminine is awakened, and we've gone through our dark night of the soul. And this is beyond gender. I'm not just saying just women. This is like the feminine within us, within all of us, has awakened. Like, we have gone through this, we have done this, and the feminine always awakens first. And that is because they had that compassion and nurturing, lens, heart-centered lens, is what is holding the masculine energies now.
Yeah.
And that is what is supporting this container.
Mhm.
Um, and I feel like that's so important. And yeah, that's wow, that's really been powerful, especially with what's in the media at the current moment. We have the Epstein files. We have all the energy around the safety and the security and the stability, all that uncertainty, we're feeling it. Where is all that safety and stability and security? And how has that been? Those root issues just rising to the surface and those unmet needs and those patterns and how they've been coming up.
I want to deep dive into this. Could you, because I think it's going to help lead into what's been really fresh and on my heart this week regarding this, and I want to share with people kind of a little bit of history of what I know of where that sort of entered in from my studies in the Sumerian and then also the biblical, but then even like what I mean, you're very aware of like even like some of the wounds that women have had about around being called witches and all that kind of stuff. And then this week, for me, I found out some really fascinating and really awful stuff about that, related to that was actually they were often accused of being witches because men wanted their property because they were often older
Mhm.
women who had their husbands had died, they'd inherited property, and so in order to get the property, that's what the. So I'd love for you to kind of cover the little thing.
Yeah, we can absolutely do that.
All right.
I think that's a great place for us to start, which actually means wise. And women were, yeah, they if they were widowed, they really basically had no rights. And this, this was from like 13th century and 14th, 15th, like, and it went even back further. But, there were so many women persecuted and hunted, and there was actually a manual on, like, how to do it. And it goes so deep and so far down. And there were certain people, Pope.
5th century preached that women's bodies were evil, that women were evil.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly, right? That and if you yeah, if you had any sort of spiritual gifts, if you had any sort of if you were an herbalist, if you were a midwife, if you were the list goes on and on, if you were a prophetess, if you had any sort of like visions, basically
Mhm.
anything that was spiritual about you, it could be deemed as, or if you had, yeah, if you had land, if you had money, if you had anything that was really of value that someone else wanted,
Mhm.
then you could easily be put up for grabs as a witch. Somebody could easily take possession of that just by saying, oh, well, this person, I think they're a witch. So, yeah, that persecution wound runs really, really deep. And yeah, the witch hunt was on, and so many, and it's still happening. Like, this is not something that has ended. Like, this is still happening in other countries. Like, and there's it's still happening.
Yeah, I read a statistic this week that said I I know it was happening still in India as one of the countries, and I believe that was between like maybe 2016 and 19 or something, but more recently between 2021 and now, I think there's still been like over 1,500 women that have been accused of witchcraft and punished for it and murdered.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's still happening, and I think it's around the world. But there are definitely some countries with certain beliefs that definitely still are all about that punishment.
Yeah. Exactly. So when the separation wound first came to the surface for me, it was really 10 years ago when I first started doing goddess circles, when I started first hearing the call to just have a safe space for women to connect, to start learning about the goddess, about a feminine way, a different lens, a heart-centered lens, a spiritual lens, connecting to their intuition, their creativity. And I was using art and vision guided visualization, and I got this image when I was working on my own ancestral lineage of how far back my lineage went of this separation wound between the masculine and feminine. And it
Mm,
went
wow.
way, way back. And it showed me sort of a collective story. And it was almost like this kind of virus, right, seeped in. It was like this kind of person whispering into the ear, almost like seeding doubt and fears and worries into the ear of this man. And then there was sort of this really graphic image, but it was very symbolic, where he took his hand and he put it down his partner's throat and pulled out her heart and took a bite and then put it back. And I know it sounds, really graphic, but symbolically, what that showed me was like that that one took a piece of her heart. Two, it tore her throat, her ability to speak, to share her truth, to self-express, right? The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, the wounding. And then also it showed a lot of guilt and shame with him doing that, right?
Mhm.
Based off this seated fear
Mhm.
that was like planted in him.
Mhm.
And so that was the story. And I was doing like soul work at the time, and the first goddess like that came through. I don't know if we can see this. Well, if you're on the cast, the YouTube, you can see it. But at the time, I was doing some soul collage, and the first one was this one. And so I'll describe it if you can't see it, but it's kind of like women sitting at the table, and there's like hands, and there's a bunch of apples, and it says, "I am her voice." And it
Mhm.
says, "The choice is yours." And it's simple. And there's a whole bunch of beautiful jewelry too. And at this time, I didn't know 4 years from here I would be doing some co-collaborating with a really beautiful jewelry artist and
Mhm.
having a jewelry line. But it was Lilith.
Mhm.
Lilith came through as the goddess.
Mhm.
And Lilith is such a beautiful representation that we have right now as the goddess of equality and
Mhm.
justice. And maybe Arla, you can share a little bit more about Lilith and who she is, being Adam's first wife. Is that
Mhm.
correct?
That's my understanding, and from what I've listened to and read, I don't know as much about her, but I my understanding is that she refused to be underneath him,
Mhm.
and that meant in every way, including sexually. She was like, I'm not. We're equals, and I'm not going to let myself be treated this way. And that the version that the church wanted was someone more submissive, and so she basically kind of got pushed out. And it's so fascinating because in reality, as someone who grew up in fundamentalism, in reality there's no way the 8 billion people that we have right now could come from just two people, just Adam and Eve. So even in the Bible it mentions that there were other people that Adam and Eve's children were with, so it's obvious that they weren't the only two around, and yet we focus on them because God created them. Well, about all the others, like where do they all come from? Like there's so many questions there that people don't stop and really think about. And so the reading that I've and studying that I've done with ancient Sumerian, which is the tablets of the Sumerian were much older than the stories that are in the Bible. And interestingly enough, Moses, who wrote Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the first 5 books, he was from Egypt. Like he had spent his whole life growing up in Egypt. He was with the Pharaoh. They took him on all those ceremonies to all those temples. He knew about all that stuff. So he had some idea that these stories were really old, but he didn't necessarily, the story wasn't copied word for word, basically. And some of the stuff in the ancient Sumerian, the way they describe it, Eve would have been exonerated in the Bible because she actually awakened to the fact that they weren't supposed to be worshiping these other beings. They had direct source connection. They had
Mm.
the ability still within their beings to worship the true source, not these other beings that were forcing them into slavery, basically. So um, but I kind of have wondered if maybe some of that got left out and they, they made even a gentler the version that they wanted. And a lot of people don't realize this, but the church at that time that kind of put the Bible together, they were, they were an arm of Rome, which was very
Yes.
patriarchal.
Yes.
And
They were handpicked. They were handpicked out of hundreds,
yes, there's
hundreds.
so much that's been left out. I mean, if
Mhm.
you, yeah, and I really think that they tweaked the stories too in the translations and things like that to make it more
Heavily
palatable.
edited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that led to a succession of various crimes against humanity throughout history. And I really feel like we need to return to the more original versions that recognize that women had a beautiful part. In fact, they were critical in helping with that return to source and with that
Yes.
understanding of that connection to source.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, if you read Mary Magdalene Unveiled, Megan Watterson, if you read The Divine Sophia, Trisha McCannon, they go into such beautiful detail of like the Bible and how things were edited and how they were, how it was handpicked and what was going on at the times and how it was selected in order the power and control, the power
Mm-hmm.
and control and the external authority versus, the internal authority. And we are the internal authority. And that gives people individual power. And that's not what was wanted at that time.
Well, people
And
forget that Rome was incredibly, I mean, it was really violent, I mean, people went to the Colosseums to enjoy violent, bloody things. And, the Catholic Church, even now, in some of the Epstein files that came out, it reveals some of the horrific blood sacrifice things that go on underneath the Vatican.
mm,
It's still going on today, but we keep thinking, oh, this is
mm,
something new or whatever. This is ancient. This has been going on for a really long time. And we as humanity, we have to stand up and say, enough. We are done with this.
yeah. Yeah.
It feels my
So the
fire.
masculine awakening, right? What's awakening on the planet right now? What's being revealed? It's a mirror.
Mm-hmm.
It's the where the feminine has felt betrayed,
Mm-hmm.
where they felt abandoned, where they have felt the lack of protection,
Yeah.
not valued, not seen, those wounds. Yeah, there's anger.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
There's rage. There's outrage. Enough.
In fact,
And
yeah, I was mentioning earlier too that I watched the Billy Carson. He has 2 episodes that he did there. I think they're well over an hour, maybe hour and a half. That
mhm,
where he personally had inspected a bunch of the Epstein files, because I mean there's like 3 million pages. I mean it is huge, and there was all kinds of things that I had no idea about. And he would just bring them up on the screen and show you, and he would bring up other videos that had happened in the news showing that people had become aware of some of these things and were trying to bring it to light even like 10 years ago. And I just, it's interesting that it came yesterday to me because I'd already had about 2 weeks where I've really been wrestling with this. Did you have something else you wanted to say along that before I deep dive into that though? Okay.
go for it.
So
This
this
is a
has
great way
been,
to go.
yeah, this has been a really fresh thing. And I didn't realize that I still had so much stuff in there, that pain in there from all that, from that, the wound. And I had a couple situations trigger me. One, someone asked me if I would be willing to do a support and healing kind of conversation with a bunch of people going through divorce. And they had sent me this picture of women, and so I assumed that they wanted to do it for women. And then they texted me back a little while later after we're going through it, and they were like, well, I don't want to alienate any men because there's a lot of men going through it that are hurting too. And my gut was just like, oh, I don't want to do it. And then I was like, oh, that's a big clue right there, Arla, that you've got some feelings around that. So I started really working through that. And then this week, I thought that I had taken it really far. And then this week, one of my good friends, I was mentioning to her what I was feeling about all this, and like how about with the feminine, with the divine feminine, how angry I felt about recognizing all of these things that I had been bumping up against in my own life and my own pain. And then also things were coming to me this week. Like I was reading a historian that was talking about the witch wound, what we just talked about, and how often it had to do with money and greed more than actual witchcraft and things like that. And so I was
Yeah.
feeling so much, like I was expressing to her how upset I felt, but I didn't go really into it. I was kind of like, kind of more casually mentioning it. And she was like, yeah, but the divine feminine, they've been through a lot too. And I was, or divine masculine. And I was like, yeah, you're right. And then a second later, I was like, I don't want to brush over. And so that thought crossed my mind. And then I just said to her, I'm like, I don't want to brush over this though, because this is so huge and people don't often realize where all this comes from, that this wound that the feminine's been carrying for so long, it comes from, like I knew about Pope Gregory and he's preaching about women's bodies being evil and like all of this stuff. And I'm like, this wound has been there for a long time. And then that caused me to realize she was a mirror for what I had been glossing over. And then I had to face some deeper pain that I had around a version of sexual assault that I went through from a family member growing up. And I feel like in a lot of ways there's been a lot of healing, because there's like I enjoy like sex and things like that, but I've never been able to really enjoy it without guilt. So there's like that part. And number two, there was a part of what happened that I had never really faced that felt almost unspeakable for me. And that was one of the things that this person did, the way that they did it with almost a reverence to my body. The way that happened, it was like they were very tender, but they were committing an assault and a violent act against my dignity. And
Yeah.
I had never been able to
It's not.
soften into that and to feel it and to realize how just confusing and appalling that was. Then the tears came,
Mm.
and that again, that wounding. And then I felt like the adult part of me was like, because I had cut that person out of my life a long time ago, and I felt like, and I'd written them a letter basically saying, hey, you can't be in my life because you're not safe, and I don't know, I can't trust you around my own children. I can't. This is not safe, and you need counseling and help. And until you do
Mhm.
that, I don't want you in my life. And my
Yeah.
soul asked me basically this week, like, how did you feel when you sent that? And I was like, because this person would always tell me I have to forgive, that
Mm.
I have to trust and let them back in, and they would use the Bible to justify what they had done. And my soul asking me that, I felt so much relief to not have them in my life anymore. And so it was a week where I really had to feel into some of the old wounding that I thought I'd already dealt with.
Wow. Wow. That's big, Arla. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, that's so huge to recognize too, that where there's religion, there's going to be sexual wounds almost always. And that's one of the things we are dealing with as a collective, as we're dealing with as a personal, is sexual wounds. That is what we're healing on this planet. The whole Me Too movement, like it is huge. And the family, the power and control. There's a lot of tie between sex and money too. There's those wounds are intertwined as well. So we are healing so much is coming to the surface. I just
Mhm.
have to put that out there. And this may be a really sensitive subject to our listeners. I also want to have a lot of compassion right now to anyone who's listening, to just know that if this is fresh wounds, that it's important that you find someone that you feel safe to talk to. There are people, therapists, to help and counseling, to support all kinds of healing, holistic healers, individual people to talk to. it's really good to get support, but you know that these wounds are coming up to the surface in order to heal, to be seen, to be heard, to be felt. And that discernment piece is so important to honor your no's. The forgiveness piece that came up so much and still comes up so much in therapy of like,
Mhm.
I was told I had to forgive. I was told I had to, you know, the Bible says this, the Bible says that. And that puts so much guilt on a person to do that piece.
Mhm.
And no, like you honor your body, you honor your truth, you honor your discernment. And it's so empowering for you to discern and to put those healthy boundaries down with that person and to say, no, I'm not going to give my time, my energy, and my attention to you. I'm using my discernment. I am not going to allow you to be around me, to be around my children, to be around whoever, right? Like,
Yeah.
no, that is not okay. I feel like we have been planted a lot of star seeds, right? In these generations, in these families that maybe you might be the first generation in your family that is talking about this, getting therapy about this, not
Mhm.
sweeping it under the rug,
Absolutely.
stopping
Yeah.
the generational trauma, sexual
Yeah.
trauma, incest, you know, stopping it in the family. Like
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
my family.
Yep.
That was my family. That's been the story. It's been going on in my family a really long time, and it was just
Yeah.
it was like, "No, this is done, like, we're gonna start talking about this," and all of a sudden, like, holidays became, like, group therapy. It's like,
Mhm.
"This is it.
Mhm.
No more. This is
Mhm.
why have we not started talking about this? Why do we just ignore that
Yeah.
you know, these people did this and why are we just now finding this out or why are we pretending like this didn't happen? No, we're going to start talking about this so it continues to keep the other generations safe and they
Mhm.
know. No, we talk about it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think for me too, in the middle of all that was began the seeds of sovereignty of realizing that I was that person was programming me to believe a certain way. And there was a really significant event that happened because during that time, I don't know if I shared this story with you, maybe I have, but I was after it happened, 'cause I was about 11 and a half. I was I was suicidal, which in church churchianity, that's a big no-no because then you go to hell, blah blah blah. And I remember telling God the same prayer over and over and over again, like crying out and crying and just being like, God, this wound is too deep. The scar is too big. I'm never going to get over it. And I just want to come home. I don't want to be here. And I just remember praying that same thing over and over again. And I got sent to church camp. And there was these people that were there that were from Scotland. And one of the women started praying for me after this one meeting. And she stops and she goes, I feel like you've been through something really hard and you've been telling God that the wound is too deep and the scar is too big and you're never going to get over it and you just want to come home. She's saying to me word for word everything that I've been praying for those months. And all of a sudden I realized in that moment that God was not like him, that what I was being told about the situation by him was not how God saw it. And so anyway, I just felt like the seeds of understanding that just because I'm told something a certain way, that doesn't mean that's how the divine sees it. That's not how source sees it. And that it's okay for me to start, kind of thinking for myself. But even then, it was like, we were at one point sat down, a couple of my family members and myself sat down and told why we were the cause of all of this person's problems.
You
What
blame. Mm.
I wore too short of shorts and blah blah blah, whatever. I was like in my 30s before I was like, wait a minute, I didn't buy my clothes. How is it my fault? you know? But yeah, I
Oh,
needed that.
and regardless, and I've heard that so many times, and regardless what you wear and what you don't wear. It's the other person's
Yeah.
responsibility to know how to handle their
Mhm.
behavior and
Right.
their emotions, regardless what the other person wears.
Absolutely.
Like, come
Absolutely.
on. That's the adult is the
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
responsible,
Yeah. Absolutely.
regardless
Yeah.
how the child dresses or not dresses. Like, come on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've heard that so many times.
It's maddening. It's totally
It
maddening, you
is.
know?
Yeah,
And
that's
I
where the
kind of,
anger and frustration and
yeah.
yeah, to tell a child that, and I've heard too, right? If it's hysterical, it's historical, which hysterical is another ridiculous word they have put on women if they're too emotional.
And off
But
island you go because you're too emotional.
and when it comes down the line from another woman, it's also really hurtful and it's another form of betrayal.
Yeah.
And it comes from another woman because it was probably told to them as well. And that's where the generation of pain continues to be that generational cycle of trauma and abuse because they were never supported or saved or protected as well. Because that pain continues down that ancestral line. And that's why this has to stop, right? That's why the star seeds are planted in the family to do this ancestral work to stop the generational trauma and abuse, to start talking about it, to heal the wounds, to work, right? And all you have to do is work on yourself and you do the healing, right? You do the soul work,
Mhm.
you do the grief work. It's not about forgiving the very first thing you do. That may be part of the acceptance process at the very end
Mhm.
when you've processed and resolved,
Mhm.
but that's not what you do because it's the right. It's as you work and process through the emotions, because all your emotions are valid,
Yeah.
your feelings, you express and explore them and allow them to be seen and heard and felt, and
Mhm.
you move them through in a healthy way.
Mhm.
And then you alchemize them and you empower them
Mhm.
and you move them into that honor, then you might find that place in acceptance and forgiveness for yourself, for
Yeah.
yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what I realized too. You know, I had that big realization that the forgiveness was for myself. And then also just like realizing this week that, you know, it's like a lot of times when you go through these things, you think, okay, I spent, you know, X amount of time in counseling and coaching and X amount of money and things have got a lot better. So it's all healed, it's all better. But then, you know, sometimes things come up again, you know, and that was the thing is it came up again this week and I had to face a different aspect of it, you know, to be treated kind of like with this reverent tenderness, but have this really violent awfulness happening. And I just thought it's almost like I got this picture in my mind as I was meditating and writing and journaling and all this stuff of the person that had done this. It was like this big ball of twisted, yucky, just stuff going on in that person's head. And, you know, it was like a visual revelation of the sickness that's inside. It was just black and it smelled awful. And it was just like this. And I realized that's all the lies, all the things. And I know that the person who did it to me had also been abused to a certain point. That doesn't excuse the behavior on any level, but it explains
Right.
the black ickiness in there, you
Right.
know?
And not all people who are abused abuse other people
That's
too.
very true. Yep. Because and I think a lot of us who came here during this time were transformational characters. We're, you know, like you said, the star seeds and the people that are here to say, hey, and this is how you this is how you walk through it. You don't walk through it just shutting down how you really felt about it, the pain that was there. You don't just pretend like it's gonna go away. It's that's
No,
you
because it turns into addiction. It turns into numbing. You check out, like you
know,
avoid.
and being
It's
abused on
repressed, and that's why the empaths are feeling all the collective shit of the dark night of the soul the
yeah.
masculine is going through
Mhm.
because it's all the repressed energy and emotion that they're not dealing with.
Yeah.
That's why, because it's so hard and heavy of everything that's been repressed for so long that they
Mhm.
haven't dealt with.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like when we don't deal with it too, at least in my case, it led to me being abused in other ways because I wasn't able to really. I kept looking almost like for a savior, and so then I got involved in a church cult for 14 years because I was looking for a savior who would have ended this thing in my family. But really, I get to be my own sovereign being because as I'm doing that healing work, I'm my own hero because that allows
Really,
me to then have a voice, and it allows me to then be able to say no to those things that I'm not allowing that in my life. And the voice that I'm going to hear is the voice, that still small voice, the source that's inside of me that loves me, that will not allow me to be treated that way, and will not allow myself to treat myself less than I am.
and that's the inner work. That's the inner work. That's where you do the work, right? You become that for yourself. That is that healing process. Yeah, that sovereignty, that wholeness, reclaiming, remembering who you are at your wholeness, that you are sovereign, sexual, and whole being, spiritual, right? This might be a good time to remind people of yeah, what you do and also what you're teaching.
I actually have been thinking I need to probably put on my YouTube channel more about the sovereignty because I've been really passionate about it, and really, I look back at my life over the last like 20, 25 years, and even 30 or longer, where all these themes, I started to realize different areas where I was being programmed, whether it was in my medical journey, with my body and health and wellness, or in religion, or with my finances, all these different pieces. And it's crazy because right now, all of these different pieces were in the Epstein files, like some of the programming that I've been talking about financially, and all of it was, Billy Carson touched on almost all of it. But the class that I'm teaching right now is about standing in your divine sovereignty. What happens in the body when we're being lied to or when we're being manipulated, understanding what programming looks like, and how we feel emotionally, and what the clues that our emotions are, and the power of that, and of being still and present in the moment and breathing into it so that we can feel what's going on, so we're not easily manipulated. And that's a really quick summary of some really beautiful but in-depth material. So I have a 5-week class right now that I'm teaching on sovereignty and about returning to our own sovereign selves, the inner authority that is in there, that's meant to keep us safe, that's not just meant to keep us safe, but allow us to explore our gifts and what we bring to the planet and who we are. And so much of that gets shut down with fear, and it ties in so much with the work that you do also, of being in enjoyment and pleasure, because then we're not in a space of fear. That's always, fear is all about harm. It's all about loss, and it's all about pain. And so, yeah, it's
We
been
have to connect to the body first. We
yeah,
have to,
absolutely.
and we're not connected to the body when we've experienced trauma, when it hasn't felt pleasurable and when it hasn't felt in control.
Absolutely.
So yeah, the first thing is connecting back to the body and that embodiment and finding finding what feels safe,
Mhm.
what we can trust,
Mhm.
or coming back to that place of sovereignty.
Mhm.
Um,
It's
yeah,
amazing when you do the work, when you really do let yourself face it, and let sorrow come in if you need to, or let whatever it is that's asking to be acknowledged. I feel like what happened is there's a deep, like, it's like the peace and the stillness that I have. Maybe it only went to about here before, and I feel like it's now settling deeper and deeper and deeper into my chakra system. And that's been a really, like, that feels really good, but sometimes in the middle of facing whatever the feeling is, it doesn't always feel, it feels pretty terrible. Yeah.
Well, the idea is to continue to do the work though, right? That's the intention, to continue to feel it,
Yeah.
when it comes up, to to honor it, to give it a place to go, to give it an outlet,
Mhm.
whether that's through whatever form of creative expression or movement, or to allow it to be seen, to be heard, to be felt, and where it can have a voice,
Mhm.
where it can have a voice.
Yeah. Because even right now in the middle of this, in the middle of our conversation, I'm feeling that fire. I'm feeling the fire of the rage and the anger, and it's like I
Yeah.
spent so much of my life really, being the peacemaker in my family or wanting to be the peacemaker or all of these things. And if in order to do that, I have to be at peace or I have to, and it's like, no, there's a time and a place for the rage. There's a time and a place for those big feelings. There's a time and a place for all of it. And it's okay to feel it and to allow it to be there because pushing against it just makes it stay. It's whatever you resist persists. So I feel like
Yeah.
this has been a really powerful couple weeks for me in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, the truth is coming up to the surface, and the truth is just part of how we get to peace, of love, of light, of hope, of truth, and of peace. And when you're in that place in you, and I'm in that place in me, we are one. And that is how we get to union. That is how we get to our balance within our masculine and feminine, how it all comes to light.
And
And
that remembered,
that
I'm wearing my,
remembered
yeah,
place. Yeah.
yeah. I'm remembering
And
my lesson.
Isis.
Yeah, Egypt. It's the Isis, the winged Isis, and Isis is about remembering him. And she remembered Osiris. She remembered the masculine back together. And after he was
She
dismembered,
had to awaken first.
yeah, yeah. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's where we're at right now as a society. Just a really quick note too is really interesting. There is an Edgar Casey prophecy where he talks about how as some of the leadership that's there right now in our nation falls apart when after is a feminine woman rising with compassion bringing healing. I thought that was so powerful, and he also talked about in his prophecies about how important sovereignty is and about how people need to tap back in to that sovereignty and that inner voice, inner authority. So it's going to be an interesting next few years because this is all going to be a big theme for everybody.
Yeah, because it's bringing sacred back, right? Sacred back to ourself first, our reflections of relationships, which is humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And when we have that reflection, it's all a reflection of the planet, which is me, ME, Mother Earth. It's all us. It's all a reflection of ourself. So it's all one, which is
Mm-hmm.
what we're getting back to, is just recognizing that everything we've done to ourselves, we've done to her. And that's what we're trying to come back into sovereignty to again, and recognize, that wholeness of Mother Earth too. And yeah, that wisdom, right? The apple coming
Mm-hmm.
back to Lilith, the symbology there, you
Mm-hmm.
know, apple. That it's wisdom. We just have to recognize that it's ours,
Mm-hmm.
accepting ourselves in our growth, and just taste the deliciousness of that fruit of life without guilt, without fear, without
Mm-hmm.
remorse, and just take a bite of that apple. So it's ours. It's the wholeness is ours. And yeah, we
That's
have
some
so many
amazing.
beautiful guides.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's some amazing symbology. There's an old saying, "An apple a day keeps the doctor away."
Mm.
I wonder if there was more to that saying than what we ever realized. More wisdom to it.
Oh, don't you think? I mean, all the symbology and all the even Isis remembering Osiris together, she was doing that for him, leading the way, and how she's just made this huge return at this time in his story and her story. It's not by coincidence at all. She's leading the way, and there's so many beautiful feminine guides, and role models that we have right now to show us the way through all cultures. You know, I have Kuan Yin
Mhm. Mhm.
behind,
I love
you
her
know, another heart
passion.
healer
Mhm.
known as the breaker of chains,
Yeah.
ancestral chains, rides two pink dragons. Come on, amazing,
Yeah.
right? We
Yeah.
just have so many beautiful healers with us in all cultures, all backgrounds, doing the same kind of work, you know, leading us,
Mhm.
supporting us in alongside of the beautiful divine masculine ascended holy masters as well, all under, you know, the umbrella of divine
Mhm.
source,
Mhm.
Christed, Sophia energy. Yeah.
Can I share one more really quick story? I
Yeah.
was
Go
at
for it.
the I was at the mall. There's a about an hour and a half away. There's a bigger city with a mall, and I had gone down there to meet with a business owner to do. I was going to do a website for her, and I'm walking along, and this really handsome guy, as he's walking by, he goes, I love your hair, or something like that, and I was like, thank you, and kind of almost sped up walking, and I just thought later, I was like, I wonder what would happen if in my divine feminine, divine feminine, if I had just stopped and turned and walked over to him and just looked him in the eye and said, thank you so much. Because it's the open reception, of when the masculine is moving out into something positive and beautiful, allowing that open reception, and also realizing there's a part of me that while I said thank you and I did mean it and feel it, I didn't wasn't allowing myself to deeply feel into what a blessing what a blessing it was to have someone be positive and say a beautiful thing, the divine masculine step out that way. So it made me think about it today. I was like, and just out of curiosity, what would that be like to kind of do the opposite instead of running, let it absorb and go in and look someone in the eye and say, thank you so much. What is that?
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's a good one. That's a good one. How often, okay, I'm pointing to my arms if people are listening and not seeing this, but these are our give and receive, right? The extensions of our heart center, our left side and our right side, our masculine and our feminine, and our extensions of our heart center. But how often do we cut off? Do we close off? Right? Do we not
Yeah.
open to receive
Mhm.
because of trauma, because of, where it hasn't felt safe to look somebody in the eye, which is really intimate, by the way, really vulnerable, or just to say thank you, another really difficult thing for a lot of people to do, or to open a heart center to receive something. That in itself is really hard. Yeah, I would be so curious to see how other people feel about that too. That's my lit from within thing. I trust, I allow, I open, I receive.
Mhm.
Like that's our key to like open the feminine way. Have to have trust. You have to know you have choices before you can open and receive. And as above, so below. Same. That goes for both work, above and below. You have to feel safe before you can open and receive to any kind of heart work or creative work to birth anything with
Instead
the
of picking up the
masculine.
pace and running away.
Yeah, but that's such a beautiful example of how quick and easy we deny ourselves of it,
Mhm.
of that, if we're magnetizing it, if we're calling it in, if we're like, hey, I want it, but how
Mhm.
open are we to receive it when it's right there? Like I just kind of had something similar when I went into the restaurant and the server was just like, wow, you have a beautiful smile. And I was just like, oh yeah, thanks. And it was
Uh-huh.
just like, so I was like, I don't know you. Or, like I was too
Uh-huh.
busy trying to figure out what I wanted, on the menu. It's like, yeah, how often do we shut that down? Like I'm just kind of going through my mind right now, like, oh, yeah, I'm trying to call in the same thing with divine masculine. And it's like, how many times am I like shutting that shit down without even realizing it?
Well, and if we say we want it, we want that to be restored, the divine masculine as well as the divine feminine coming in. But then those it's those subtle little things that I feel like I'm source is helping me become aware of. My soul is like, hey, wait a second, you say you want this, and then you literally picked up the pace and ran away, even though I did
Right,
say so. Anyway,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, good reminders, good reminders. That's a great place to come to a close, is we're about right at 111 on my time, so
Oh,
new
yeah, my
beginnings.
friend too. Yeah, I love it.
Nice.
Cool.
Okay.
You.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today and being a part of this collective journey and being here spiritually naked with soul. So until next time,
And
namaste.
lots of love to anyone who's going through this. And thank you for listening to us. And hopefully, what we shared today will bring some peace and some healing and some courage to face the thing that doesn't always feel easy to face.
Yeah, this episode definitely had some intense conversations. So please, if you need to talk to someone, please reach out locally to someone in your area. Yeah, get find someone to talk to and to connect with. You do not have to go through this alone.
Right.
Yeah,
Much love to all of our listeners, to you, Molly. Much love and
yeah,
supporter of you.
and you can find out more, yeah, about Arla and myself down below.